The storage unit auction in downtown Detroit was supposed to be Marcus Chen's last shot at making rent. With $500 in crumpled bills, everything left from selling his engineering textbooks, he bid on Unit 47, formerly owned by Agent Sarah Mitchell, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The other bidders walked away when they saw the government tags, but Marcus was desperate. Inside the unit, past boxes of old files and standard office furniture, he found something that made his blood run cold: a live surveillance monitor showing real-time feeds from 12 different locations. Names scrolled across the screen. Senators, judges, CEOs, all marked with red timestamps from just hours ago. Marcus realized this wasn't old equipment. This was an active operation, and according to the files scattered around him, Agent Mitchell hadn't retired. She'd been murdered 3 days ago for getting too close to something called Operation Blackwater. Now the same people who killed her were about to discover that a homeless ex-engineer had stumbled onto the biggest government conspiracy in decades. The question wasn't just what Marcus had bought, it was how long he'd live to regret it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at the monitors, their blue glow casting shadows across his gaunt face. 3 months of sleeping in his car and surviving on convenience store coffee had left him hollow-eyed and desperate, but his engineering mind still worked with precision. These weren't consumer-grade security cameras. The image quality, the encrypted data streams, the military-grade hardware humming quietly in specially designed cases. This was federal surveillance equipment worth more than most people's houses. He picked up a manila folder marked Blackwater, eyes only with hands that shook from both hunger and fear. Inside were surveillance photos, financial records, and communication intercepts that painted a picture so disturbing he had to read it twice to believe it. A network of high-ranking officials, from federal judges to Fortune 500 CEOs, all connected through a web of money laundering, contract manipulation, and what appeared to be systematic elimination of whistleblowers. Agent Sarah Mitchell's handwritten notes filled the margins. Her cramped script detailed connections between a defense contractor called Blackwater Solutions and a series of accidents that had befallen investigative journalists and government auditors over the past 2 years. The most recent entry was dated just 4 days ago. They know I'm close. Moving equipment to secure location. If something happens to me, the surveillance feeds are set to auto-archive. Someone needs to... The sentence ended abruptly in a smeared line of ink. A soft chime from the monitor made Marcus jump. One of the video feeds had changed, showing a black sedan pulling up to what looked like a suburban office building. He watched in real time as 2 men in dark suits entered the building. The timestamp showed it was happening right now, somewhere in the city. The camera angle suggested it was hidden, possibly in a building across the street or in a utility pole. Marcus rifled through more files, finding detailed dossiers on each surveillance target. Senator Patricia Hawkins, chair of the Defense Appropriations Committee. Federal Judge Raymond Torres, who'd overseen several high-profile defense contract disputes. CEO Victoria Marsh of Blackwater Solutions, whose company had somehow won every major federal security contract for the past 5 years, despite having competitors who underbid them by millions. The pattern was clear, even to someone who'd been living out of his car for months. Agent Mitchell had been building a case that would bring down some of the most powerful people in the country, and now she was dead, officially listed as a traffic accident victim according to the newspaper paperclip to her file. Another monitor showed movement. This time it was a parking garage, and Marcus recognized the man walking toward a silver Mercedes, Judge Torres himself. The timestamp showed this was happening in real time, just across town. Marcus realized he was watching these people's lives unfold as it happened, seeing their meetings, their movements, their secrets. A phone began ringing from somewhere deep in the storage unit. Not his phone. He'd pawned it weeks ago. This was coming from behind a stack of equipment cases. Following the sound, he found a secure satellite phone. its screen showing an incoming call from control. Marcus stared at the phone, paralyzed. Answering it would mean stepping into Agent Mitchell's world completely. Ignoring it might mean missing crucial information, but it also might keep him alive longer. The phone rang 5 times, then went silent. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time he answered. Mitchell. The voice was gruff, urgent. Marcus said nothing. Sarah, thank God. We lost contact with your feeds for 6 hours. Thought they'd gotten to you too. The Torres meeting is happening now. Are you recording? Marcus looked at the monitor showing Judge Torres in the parking garage. A second man had joined him now, someone Marcus recognized from another file, Director Michael Kozlov of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division. They were talking animatedly, and Torres was handing over what looked like an envelope. Sarah, you there? Marcus's mouth went dry. They thought he was Agent Mitchell. They thought she was still alive. Marcus spent his first night with the equipment in an abandoned warehouse on the east side, where the skeletal remains of Detroit's manufacturing glory provided shelter for those society had forgotten. He'd chosen a corner office on the 2nd floor, its broken windows offering multiple escape routes, a habit learned from too many nights when trouble came looking. The tactical vest fit better than anything he'd worn in months. Real military surplus had a weight to it, a substance that made him feel human again. He'd been a soldier once, before the pills, before the discharge, before the long slide into invisibility. The familiar pressure against his shoulders brought back muscle memories of purpose. It was the soft electronic beeping that woke him at dawn. Marcus sat up, instantly alert. The sound came from somewhere inside the vest. His fingers probed the tactical pouches until he found a small device he'd missed in yesterday's excitement, a rectangular box no bigger than a smartphone, its screen glowing with amber text. Subject, Morrison Janet. Status, Mobile. Location, I-75 northbound. Mile marker 247. Last update, 6/23/15. He stared at the screen, heart hammering. This wasn't surplus gear. This was active equipment. Marcus fumbled through the other pouches with new urgency. The radio crackled to life when he accidentally hit a button, and a calm voice filled the empty warehouse. Phoenix base to Eagle units. Subject vehicle has exited the highway. Switching to street-level tracking. He nearly dropped the device. Federal agents were somewhere out there, and they probably wanted their equipment back. Marcus started to strip off the vest, then stopped. $500. His last $500, spent on what Danny Kowalski had sworn was legitimate surplus. The radio crackled again. Eagle 2, we've lost visual contact. Subject appears to be using counter-surveillance techniques. Copy that. Phoenix base shows her stationary at the Fairfield Inn, room 237. Maintain perimeter. Marcus sank against the concrete wall, pieces clicking together in his mind. Janet Morrison, whoever she was, didn't know they were tracking her through equipment that somehow ended up in a riverside pawn shop. The feds were watching someone, but that someone had bought or stolen gear that was supposed to be tracking her. He studied the small screen more carefully. GPS coordinates updated every few seconds. Battery indicator showed 78%. In the corner, a classification marking he'd missed before. Confidential. FBI Operation Nightfall. Operation Nightfall. Marcus had been out of the service for 3 years, but he remembered enough about military intelligence to know that operations had code names for a reason. This wasn't some routine surveillance of a petty criminal. This was something bigger. The radio buzzed with periodic updates throughout the morning. Janet Morrison checked out of the hotel at 8:47 a.m. She stopped for gas and coffee, made 2 phone calls from a payphone, who used payphones anymore, and drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Marcus found himself drawn into the rhythm of the surveillance, following her progress through the electronic breadcrumbs. It was like reading a thriller novel, except the characters were real and somewhere out there, unaware they had an accidental audience. At 11:15 a.m., everything changed. Phoenix base, this is Eagle 1. Subject has made contact with unknown individual. white male, approximately 6 feet, wearing a blue sedan. Michigan, plates Charlie Delta 74-9. Copy. Running plates now. Marcus pressed closer to the radio, though the transmission was already crystal clear. Eagle 1, you're not going to believe this. Vehicle is registered to Thomas Kellerman. A pause. Then, Congressman Thomas Kellerman? Affirmative. What are your orders? The silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the radio had malfunctioned. When the voice returned, it was different. Harder, more careful. Eagle units, maintain surveillance but increase distance. This is now a Priority Alpha situation. I repeat, Priority Alpha. Marcus didn't need military training to understand that Priority Alpha meant someone important was paying attention. Congressman Kellerman, he recognized the name from news reports, though he couldn't place the face. Michigan's 11th District, he thought. Appropriations Committee. The tracking device showed Janet Morrison's position as stationary for the next 20 to 7 minutes. When she finally moved, the federal agents followed at a much greater distance. Their radio chatter became clipped, professional, careful. By afternoon, Marcus realized 3 things that made his mouth go dry. First, he was accidentally monitoring an FBI operation involving a sitting congressman. Second, the agents had no idea their surveillance was being intercepted. Third, and most terrifying, Janet Morrison was heading straight toward downtown Detroit, toward his neighborhood, toward the warehouse district, where a homeless veteran was learning secrets that could get him killed. The tracking device showed her 2 miles away and closing fast. Marcus stared at the blinking device in his hands, its soft red pulse cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of the alley. The earpiece crackled again with static, then cleared to reveal a conversation that made his blood freeze. Confirmed the judge is asking questions. Too many questions. How do we handle it? Same way we handled the prosecutor in Denver. Make it look natural. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the earpiece, straining to catch every word. The voices were crisp, professional, discussing murder with the casual efficiency of ordering coffee. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows between 2 dumpsters, acutely aware that whatever he'd stumbled into was far beyond stolen surveillance equipment. Timeline, 24 hours. Mitchell's got people in place. The signal wavered, dissolving into white noise before snapping back to clarity. Marcus fumbled with the device, trying to understand its array of buttons and switches. The small screen displayed what looked like GPS coordinates and a series of codes he couldn't decipher. But the voices, those were crystal clear now. What about the FBI investigation? A cold laugh. We've got assets inside. The investigation dies with Henderson's testimony, and Henderson dies tonight. Marcus's stomach churned. Henderson. He'd heard that name on the news. Federal Judge Patricia Henderson, the one leading some kind of corruption probe. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was listening to people planning to assassinate a federal judge. His first instinct was to run, to dump the equipment and disappear into the maze of downtown streets he knew better than anyone. But as he started to move, another voice joined the conversation, and Marcus froze. The Attorney General is getting nervous. Wants reassurance this won't trace back to the appointment committee. Marcus felt the world tilt. The Attorney General? This conspiracy reached into the heart of the federal government. He thought about his years on the street, watching the city's power brokers in their expensive cars, knowing they lived in a different world where different rules applied. But this was beyond anything he'd imagined. The device in his hands felt radioactive now, dangerous beyond measure. But he couldn't move, couldn't stop listening. Henderson's protected, full detail. Not anymore. We've got someone inside her security team. Former military, clean record, completely above suspicion until tonight. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the implications. A federal judge was going to die, killed by the very people sworn to protect her, and he was the only person who knew. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus Chen, invisible to society, discarded and forgotten, was now the sole witness to a conspiracy that could topple the government. The conversation shifted to logistics, times, locations, methods. Marcus listened with growing horror as they detailed Henderson's evening routine, her route home from the courthouse, the precise moment when her trusted bodyguard would turn killer. Clean up? Standard protocol. Make it look like a random attack. The bodyguard dies too, heroic sacrifice trying to save her. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. The casual way they discussed ending lives, the bureaucratic efficiency of it all, made him nauseous. He'd seen plenty of violence on the streets, but this was different. This was systematic, institutional murder carried out by people who were supposed to represent justice. The signal began to fade again, voices dissolving into electronic whispers. Marcus frantically adjusted controls, desperate not to lose the connection. As the voices faded completely, he found himself alone with the weight of impossible knowledge. Who could he tell? The FBI? They'd mentioned assets inside the bureau. Local police? They'd laugh at a homeless man claiming to have stumbled onto a government conspiracy. Even if someone believed him, how could he prove it? The surveillance equipment was obviously stolen or leaked. Using it as evidence would only land him in federal prison. But Judge Henderson was going to die tonight unless someone warned her. Marcus stood slowly, his joints protesting after hours, crouched in the alley. The device had gone silent, its screen now showing only scrolling data he couldn't interpret. But he'd heard enough. More than enough. The morning light was growing stronger, painting the alley walls in shades of grey and amber. Soon the streets would fill with commuters heading to jobs in glass towers, their biggest worry whether they'd make their morning meetings. None of them would know that a federal judge was marked for death, that the very foundations of their government were rotting from within. Marcus pocketed the device and stepped out of the alley. He had perhaps 12 hours before Henderson's evening routine would begin, 12 hours to figure out how an invisible man could save a federal judge's life without destroying his own in the process. For the first time in years, Marcus Chen felt the weight of purpose. It terrified him. The earpiece crackled to life at 3:17 a.m., jolting Marcus from the first real sleep he'd managed in days. Hidden beneath the overpass in his makeshift camp, he fumbled for the device, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Phoenix is moving," came the same crisp voice from before. "Target has left the safe house. All units maintain distance." Marcus pressed the earpiece deeper, straining to catch every word. Through the static he could make out the sound of car engines, the low murmur of radio chatter, and something else, typing. Lots of typing. "Copy that, Control. We have eyes on the sedan, heading east on Fletcher. License plate matches the one from the Denver incident." Denver incident? Marcus sat up straighter, pulling the tablet closer. The screen showed a new cluster of red dots moving in formation through what looked like an upscale neighborhood. His breathing quickened as he realized he was watching this unfold in real time, somewhere in the city. "All units be advised." Control's voice cut through the static. "Phoenix is considered extremely dangerous. Do not engage without authorization from Blackwood." That name again. Blackwood. Marcus grabbed the notebook he'd been using to track the fragments he'd overheard and scribbled it down, his hand shaking slightly. The red dots on the screen suddenly scattered, spreading out in what looked like a coordinated pattern. Marcus had watched enough cop shows to recognize a surveillance formation, but this felt different, more sophisticated, more deadly. "Control, this is Unit 7. Phoenix just pulled into the Meridian Hotel parking garage. Should we follow?" A pause, then negative. "Maintain perimeter. We wait." Marcus's mind raced. The Meridian Hotel, he knew that place. It was downtown, maybe 15 blocks from where he was hiding, one of those gleaming towers where politicians and business executives held their power lunches and backroom deals. "Sir," came a different voice, younger, nervous. "Are we certain about the intel? If Phoenix is really meeting with—" Radio silence on names. "Agent Chen." Control's voice was sharp, cutting. "You know the protocol." The line went quiet, but Marcus caught something in that exchange. Fear. These weren't just cops tracking some street criminal. This was something bigger, something that had federal agents scared to speak names over their own secure channels. He scrolled through the tablet's interface, hunting for any additional information. Most of the menus were locked, requiring passwords he didn't have, but he found a section labeled Active Operations. His stomach dropped as he read the file names: Operation Nightfall, Project Crossroads, Denver Cleanup. Denver Cleanup. That phrase sent ice through his veins. Control. We have a problem. A new voice, urgent and tight with stress. Phoenix isn't alone. Count at least 6 individuals entering through the service entrance. This wasn't in the briefing. Copy that. Stand by for updated orders. Marcus's hands were trembling now as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. 6 people, a hotel, federal agents too scared to use names. Whatever Phoenix was, whatever this meeting was about, people were about to die. He could feel it in the electric tension crackling through his earpiece. The typing sounds intensified, accompanied by muffled voices he couldn't quite make out. Then control was back, and his tone had shifted to something cold and final. All units. New directive. Phoenix is no longer the primary target. Authorization has come down from the top. Anyone who exits that hotel tonight is to be considered compromised. No witnesses. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. No witnesses. They weren't just watching anymore. They were cleaning house. Sir, that's a lot of collateral damage. Are we talking about... You have your orders, Agent Chen. The red dots on Marcus's screen began moving again, tightening around the hotel like a noose. He counted at least 12 units, possibly more. Whatever was happening in that building, it was about to become a massacre, and somehow he was the only person outside the operation who knew about it. His finger hovered over the power button. Every instinct screamed at him to turn it off, throw the equipment in the nearest dumpster, and disappear into the underground tunnels where even the FBI couldn't find him. He could forget this ever happened, go back to scrounging for food and avoiding the police. But then he thought about those 6 people walking into that hotel, probably having no idea they were about to die. Thought about Agent Chen's nervous voice, questioning orders that clearly violated everything he'd sworn to protect. The earpiece crackled again. Phoenix has reached the 15th floor. All units prepare for final authorization. Marcus closed his eyes, knowing that whatever choice he made in the next few seconds would change everything. In the distance, sirens wailed through the night, but he couldn't tell if they were racing toward the Meridian Hotel or away from some other tragedy unfolding in the darkness. The red dots pulsed on his screen like a digital heartbeat, counting down to something terrible. The abandoned warehouse smelled like rust and broken dreams, but Marcus had learned to ignore worse odors during his months on the streets. He pulled the tactical vest tighter around his chest, grateful for the unexpected warmth it provided against the October chill. The strange humming had stopped hours ago, leaving only silence and the occasional distant rumble of traffic. Marcus spread his remaining belongings across a relatively clean section of concrete floor. 3 cans of soup, a half-empty bottle of water, and the mysterious black box he'd discovered in one of the vest's compartments. Under the pale light filtering through grimy windows, he could see tiny LED lights blinking in sequence along its edge. Green, amber, red, then back to green. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder that he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. He was about to open one of the cans when footsteps echoed from somewhere outside the warehouse. Marcus froze, listening. Street people learned quickly to distinguish between the casual footfalls of passers-by and the deliberate stride of trouble. These were definitely trouble. Multiple sets of boots moved with military precision across the gravel outside. Marcus grabbed the black box and his cans, retreating deeper into the shadows behind a stack of moldering cardboard boxes. The footsteps stopped directly outside the main entrance. "Thermal imaging shows one heat signature inside," a voice said. "Crisp and professional. Southeast corner, approximately 40 meters from the entrance." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. They were tracking him with military-grade equipment. But why? He was nobody, just another homeless veteran that society had forgotten. "Remember, we need the device intact," another voice replied. "If the target resists, use minimum necessary force, but the equipment is priority one." The device. Marcus looked down at the blinking box in his hands, understanding flooding through him like a cold wave. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't surplus gear. These people wanted it back badly enough to track him down in an abandoned warehouse with thermal imaging. A metallic click echoed through the space as someone worked on the door lock. Marcus cursed silently. He should have found a building with multiple exits. The warehouse only had one main door and a few high windows that would be impossible to reach quickly. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to think. The vest had multiple pockets and compartments. Maybe there was something else useful. His fingers found what felt like a small earpiece, with a wire running to a compact radio unit. Without thinking, he slipped the earpiece in and switched on the device. Static filled his ear, then cleared to reveal multiple voices in rapid conversation. "Alpha team in position at primary entrance. Bravo team, south perimeter secured. Command, we have visual on the target location. Infrared confirms single individual, appears to be stationary." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. They had teams positioned around the entire building. But then another voice cut through the tactical chatter, speaking on a different frequency. "Phoenix, this is Control. Status report on Operation Blackbird. Control, we're 48 hours behind schedule. The courier was supposed to make delivery yesterday." "That's unacceptable, Phoenix. Senator Morrison expects the files transferred before the committee hearing tomorrow morning. If this leak investigation expands, we're all burned." Marcus nearly dropped the device. Senator Morrison. He'd seen that name in news reports about some kind of corruption investigation. These weren't just random criminals. This went straight to Washington. Understood. Control. We'll have the surveillance unit recovered within the hour. The vagrant who took it won't be a problem. The casual way they discussed eliminating him sent rage coursing through Marcus's veins. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart, then watched everything fall apart when the nightmares and PTSD cost him his job, his apartment, his dignity. Now some shadow operation wanted to erase him like he'd never existed. The main door burst open with a thunderous crash. Tactical light swept the interior as armed figures in black gear moved through the entrance with practiced efficiency. Marcus counted at least 4, maybe more behind them. He looked at the device in his hands, its lights still blinking their mysterious pattern. Whatever information it contained was valuable enough to kill for, which meant it was valuable enough to keep alive with. Marcus made a decision that would either save his life or end it. He pressed what looked like a transmission button and spoke quietly into the radio pickup. "Control, this is the vagrant you want to eliminate. I've got your surveillance unit, and I've been listening to your conversations for the past 10 minutes. Senator Morrison, Operation Blackbird, files that need transferring before a committee hearing. I've heard it all." The tactical team froze, their lights sweeping frantically toward his hiding spot. "Here's the deal," Marcus continued, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Back your people off, or I start making phone calls to every news outlet in the city." The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, punctuated by the acrid tang of cigarette smoke. Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, the surveillance device pressed against his ear, watching shadows move through the maze of crates and machinery. His breath came in short, controlled bursts as he counted at least 6 figures scattered throughout the cavernous space. "Package arrives at midnight," a gravelly voice crackled through the earpiece. Senator's getting nervous about the timeline. Marcus's blood ran cold. A senator? The scope of whatever he'd stumbled into kept expanding like ripples in dark water. He adjusted his position, trying to get a better view of the speakers, when his foot knocked against a loose piece of metal. The clang echoed through the warehouse. The voices stopped. "You hear that?" someone whispered. Marcus held his breath, pressing himself deeper into the shadows between the containers. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Through a gap in the stacked crates, he could see a man in a dark jacket methodically searching the area, one hand resting on something beneath his coat. The surveillance device continued its quiet stream of intercepted communications, and Marcus realized with growing horror that these weren't just criminals. They were talking about shipments, routes, and timetables with military precision. References to the senator and Washington contacts painted a picture of corruption that reached far beyond street-level crime. "Clear on the south side," the searcher called out, moving past Marcus's hiding spot. "Good. We can't afford any complications tonight. Not with Castellanos breathing down our necks." Marcus jerked at the name. Agent Castellanos. The same person mentioned in the earlier intercepts. The FBI agent who seemed to be orchestrating rather than investigating. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Castellanos wasn't hunting these criminals, he was working with them. A new voice joined the conversation, younger and more anxious. "What if the homeless guy really did overhear something? Maybe we should—" "Relax, Tommy. Even if he did, who's going to believe some vagrant? We've got people in place. The Senators' Committee will bury any investigation before it starts." Marcus felt sick. They knew about him, knew he'd overheard their operations, and they were confident enough in their protection to dismiss him entirely. The casual arrogance in their voices revealed just how deep this conspiracy ran. The warehouse door groaned open, casting a rectangle of yellow streetlight across the concrete floor. A figure entered, silhouetted against the night. "Castellanos is here," someone announced. Marcus watched as the FBI agent strode into the warehouse like he owned it. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see the man's confident posture, the easy way he moved among the assembled criminals. This wasn't an undercover operation. This was a business meeting. "Status report," Castellanos demanded. "Route is secured, payments processed. The Senator's people have cleared the inspection schedules for the next 3 months. And our vagrant problem? Handled. Street sources confirm he's just another junkie looking for his next fix. Even if he tries to talk, we've got people who'll discredit him faster than he can open his mouth." Marcus's jaw clenched. They'd already started destroying his credibility before he'd even tried to expose them. The systematic nature of their corruption was breathtaking. They had contacts in law enforcement, government, and apparently throughout the city's infrastructure. "Good. This operation has taken 2 years to organize. I won't have it derailed by some random street trash." The casual dehumanization stung, but it also clarified something for Marcus. These people saw him as invisible, beneath notice. That invisibility, which had been a source of shame and isolation, might now be his greatest weapon. The surveillance device crackled with new activity as more agents checked in from positions around the city. Marcus listened in growing amazement as the scope of the operation revealed itself. Coordinated movements across multiple locations, law enforcement resources being deliberately misdirected, and shipments moving through the port with falsified documentation. "Midnight shipment is confirmed," Castellanos announced. "Senator Morrison's committee will announce the new trafficking task force tomorrow, which gives us perfect cover for the next phase." Marcus committed every detail to memory, every name and location. The evidence was overwhelming, but he needed more than just overheard conversations. He needed proof that would survive their inevitable attempts to discredit him. As the meeting began to break up, Marcus carefully backed deeper into his hiding spot. The surveillance device was still recording, still intercepting communications from across their network. If he could gather enough evidence, document enough connections, maybe he could find someone in authority who wasn't already compromised. The warehouse gradually emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the distant hum of city traffic. Marcus waited until silence settled completely before emerging from his hiding place. The surveillance device had captured everything, but he knew that bringing down a conspiracy this large would require more than just electronic evidence. It would require him to become someone he'd never been before, a man willing to fight back. The motel room felt like a tomb, heavy with the weight of what Marcus had witnessed. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the surveillance equipment spread across the yellowed bedspread. The display screen flickered with GPS coordinates, audio frequencies, and data streams that painted a picture too terrifying to ignore. Senator Rebecca Hartwell's voice echoed in his memory. "The Riverside project needs to be accelerated. We can't afford any loose ends." Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd stumbled into. The homeless encampment by the river, the same one where he'd spent countless nights, was apparently ground zero for something called the Riverside Project. And from what he'd overheard, it wasn't urban development. The equipment beeped softly, drawing his attention back to the screen. New coordinates appeared, followed by encrypted voice channels crackling to life. Marcus fumbled for the headphones, his hands trembling as he recognized one of the voices from the previous surveillance session. "Target acquired at the downtown library. Subject appears to be researching property records for the Riverside district." Marcus's blood ran cold. The library. He'd been there just yesterday, using their computers to look up information about the land where the encampment sat. He'd been curious about who owned it, whether there were any legal protections for the people living there. Maintain visual contact. Do not engage unless subject makes contact with media or law enforcement. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They were watching someone else, another person who'd gotten too close to whatever was happening at Riverside. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting the frequency to get a clearer signal. "This is Control. Sanitation team is standing by if needed." Sanitation team. The euphemism made Marcus's stomach turn. He'd lived on the streets long enough to know that when powerful people talked about cleaning up problems, they weren't referring to actual garbage. The screen updated with a new location marker. Whoever they were tracking had moved from the library to a coffee shop 6 blocks away. Marcus found himself reaching for his jacket before stopping himself. What was he thinking? He couldn't just walk into a surveillance operation, but as he hesitated, another voice crackled through the headphones. This one belonging to Senator Hartwell. "The journalist is getting too close. We need to move up the timeline." Journalist. Marcus's pulse quickened. Someone was investigating the Riverside project, and they were in immediate danger. He looked at the location marker again, memorizing the address. The coffee shop was only a 20-minute walk from his motel. The equipment continued its electronic chatter as Marcus paced the small room. Every instinct screamed at him to stay hidden, to keep his head down like he'd done for years on the street. But this was different. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about preventing something terrible from happening to an innocent person. He grabbed the portable monitoring device, a tablet-sized unit that could maintain the surveillance feed remotely. If he was going to do this insane thing, he needed to stay connected to their communications. The evening air was crisp as Marcus stepped onto the street, pulling his hood up against the chill. The motel was in a run-down section of downtown, surrounded by abandoned storefronts and empty lots that spoke to the city's ongoing struggles. It was the perfect place to disappear, which was exactly why he'd chosen it. As he walked toward the coffee shop, Marcus kept the monitoring device hidden in his jacket pocket, the earpiece barely visible beneath his hood. The surveillance team's chatter continued, professional, clinical discussions about angles of approach and exit strategies that made his skin crawl. The coffee shop came into view, a warm beacon of light against the darkening street. Through the large windows, Marcus could see scattered customers at small tables, laptops open, the familiar scene of urban life continuing obliviously around whatever drama was unfolding. Target is seated at the northwest corner table, blue jacket, laptop open, still appears to be researching. Marcus spotted her immediately. A woman in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back, fingers flying across her keyboard with the focused intensity of someone chasing a story. She looked so normal, so unaware of the danger circling around her. He scanned the street and spotted them, a man in a grey suit reading a newspaper at the bus stop across the street, another leaning against a building 30 yards away, talking on his phone but watching the coffee shop. Professional surveillance, the kind that costs serious money. Control, this is Watcher 2. Subject appears to be uploading files to a cloud server. Recommend immediate intervention. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. They were about to move. Whatever happened next would determine whether an innocent person lived or died, and whether the conspiracy he'd uncovered would remain buried forever. He took a deep breath and pushed open the coffee shop door, stepping across the threshold into a world where his decision would change everything. Marcus pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the alley, his breath forming small clouds in the night air. The surveillance equipment hummed quietly in his backpack, its LED indicators casting an eerie green glow through the fabric. 3 blocks away, Agent Sarah Chen sat in her car, desperately trying to trace the signal that had gone dark 12 hours ago. The homeless shelter on Morrison Street buzzed with its usual late-night activity. Marcus slipped through the side entrance, keeping his head down as he navigated past clusters of men playing cards and sharing bottles wrapped in brown paper. He needed somewhere safe to examine what he'd stumbled into, and the shelter's basement storage room would have to do. 20 minutes later, surrounded by donated clothes and broken furniture, Marcus spread the equipment across a moth-eaten blanket. The main unit beeped softly, its screen displaying a map dotted with red triangles. As he watched, one of the triangles began moving north through the city. "Subject 7 is mobile," he whispered, reading the text that appeared, "heading toward Pier 47. Marcus had spent enough time on the streets to know that nothing good happened at the piers after midnight, but the equipment's urgency was unmistakable. Whatever Subject 7 was doing, it was significant enough to warrant federal surveillance. Against every survival instinct screaming in his head, Marcus gathered the gear and headed back into the night. The waterfront stretched before him like a scene from a noir film, all shadows and reflected streetlights dancing on black water. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, adjusting the surveillance device's audio settings. Through the static, voices emerged. "Shipment arrives at 2:30. You have the manifest? Everything's arranged. Senator Morrison's been asking questions, though. He's getting too close." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. Senator Morrison, the same politician who'd been pushing for expanded homeless services, the one whose face was on campaign posters throughout the city. The man was either in on whatever was happening, or he was in danger. "Morrison won't be a problem much longer," a third voice added. "The accident is scheduled for Thursday morning. His morning jog route is predictable." Marcus fumbled for the recording function, his fingers shaking as he captured the conversation. Through the surveillance scope, he could see 3 figures standing beside a black sedan. One wore an expensive overcoat, another was dressed in casual clothes, and the third, Marcus's blood went cold, wore what looked like a federal agent's jacket. "The beauty of it," the agent continued, "is that Morrison's death will actually accelerate the investigation into homeless camps. Public sympathy always spikes after a tragedy. We'll have authorization to clear every tent, every shelter, every hiding place in the city within a week. And our missing surveillance equipment? Probably sold for drugs by now. Street people don't know what they have. Even if someone figured it out, who would believe them?" The casual dismissal hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd spent years being invisible, being overlooked, being written off as just another casualty of society's failures. But now, for the first time in years, he possessed something valuable, something that could save lives. The men began walking toward the pier's edge, where a speedboat waited in the darkness. Marcus knew he had minutes before they disappeared, taking their conspiracy with them. He adjusted the equipment's camera function, zooming in on their faces, capturing everything the FBI's own gear would record. "Initial payment is in the offshore account," the man in the overcoat said. "Once Morrison is eliminated and the camps are cleared, you'll receive the balance. 50 million to remove a few thousand inconvenient people from some very valuable real estate." Marcus felt nauseous. This wasn't just about murder. It was about genocide disguised as urban development. The homeless population was being systematically eliminated to clear land for development, and a senator who tried to help was marked for death. As the speedboat's engine roared to life, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't go to the police. At least one federal agent was involved, which meant the corruption went deep, but he could warn Senator Morrison, and he could get this evidence to someone who mattered. The surveillance equipment had been tracking these criminals for months, building a case that someone, some honest agent somewhere, was desperately trying to complete. Marcus was now the last link in that chain. He gathered the gear and began the long walk back toward downtown, where Senator Morrison's office building stood like a monument to the democracy these conspirators were trying to subvert. The homeless man who'd bought government surplus equipment had become the government's most important witness. Behind him, the speedboat disappeared into the darkness, carrying killers who had no idea their entire conversation was now recorded on their own surveillance system. Marcus smiled grimly. Sometimes being invisible was exactly the advantage you needed. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decades of neglect. Marcus pressed himself against a concrete pillar. The stolen laptop balanced precariously on a stack of moldy cardboard boxes. 3 hours had passed since his desperate escape from the hotel, and his hands still trembled as he navigated through the FBI surveillance files. The deeper he dug, the more twisted everything became. Operation Nightfall wasn't just about Senator Richardson's assassination. It was a systematic purge of anyone who threatened to expose a network of corruption that stretched from local police departments to federal agencies. The conspiracy had been years in the making, with each target carefully selected and eliminated. Marcus scrolled through encrypted communications between Agent Harrison and someone identified only as Phoenix. The messages detailed a chilling timeline. Richardson was just the beginning. 3 federal judges, 2 investigative journalists, and a forensic accountant were next on the list. All had been investigating financial irregularities tied to defense contracts worth billions of dollars. A new message appeared in real time, causing Marcus to freeze. Harrison was typing to Phoenix right now. Package delivered. Cleanup in progress. Target Alpha eliminated successfully. Moving to Target Beta tomorrow night. Target Alpha. Richardson was dead. The senator's assassination had already happened, and Marcus had been too late to prevent it. His stomach churned as the weight of failure crushed down on him. But Target Beta... there was still time. Marcus cross-referenced the target designations with the file names. Target Beta was Judge Patricia Valdez, scheduled to preside over a hearing about classified defense contract irregularities. According to the surveillance data, she lived alone in a Georgetown townhouse with minimal security. The plan was to stage her death as a home invasion gone wrong. His fingers flew across the keyboard, desperately searching for more details. Judge Valdez had been investigating Meridian Defense Corporation, a private military contractor that had received over $3 billion in no-bid contracts over the past 5 years. The money had been funneled through shell companies, with significant portions disappearing into offshore accounts. But the real revelation was in the personnel files. Phoenix wasn't just a code name. It was a reference to the mythical bird that rises from ashes. The operation was designed to destroy the current power structure and rebuild it under their control. Harrison was just a lieutenant in this organization. The real leadership included Deputy Director Catherine Wells from the FBI, Senator James Morrison from the Armed Services Committee, and CEO Robert Kane from Meridian Defense Corporation. Marcus saved everything to a secure drive he'd found in the surveillance kit, his mind racing with possibilities. He had evidence of treason, murder, and conspiracy, but who could he trust? The corruption reached so high that traditional law enforcement was compromised. A sound outside made him freeze. Footsteps on gravel, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Through a cracked window, Marcus spotted the distinctive black SUVs surrounding the warehouse. They'd found him somehow. He quickly ejected the drive and slipped it into his shoe, then grabbed the portable equipment from his surveillance kit. If he was going to die tonight, he'd make sure the evidence survived. The laptop went into his backpack along with the recording devices and tracking equipment. "Marcus Rivera," Harrison's voice echoed through the empty space. "We know you're in there. You've seen things you shouldn't have seen, but we can work something out, come out peacefully, and nobody gets hurt." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. After everything he'd witnessed, Harrison expected him to believe they'd just let him walk away. He moved deeper into the warehouse, using the maze of abandoned machinery and storage containers as cover. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Harrison continued, his voice getting closer. "This is bigger than you can imagine. National security depends on maintaining certain arrangements. People like Judge Valdez and Senator Richardson, they would have destroyed everything with their idealistic crusades." The admission was being recorded by the equipment in Marcus's backpack. Even if they caught him, the devices were set to automatically upload to secure servers. It was a fail-safe he'd configured during his 3 hours of preparation. Marcus reached the rear of the warehouse, where a loading dock offered potential escape routes. But as he peered out, more agents emerged from the shadows. They'd surrounded the entire building. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stay where you are. Help is coming. A friend." Before Marcus could process this development fully, the lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie red shadows throughout the warehouse. In the confusion, he heard shouting and running footsteps. Someone else was here. Someone Harrison's team hadn't expected. Marcus used the chaos to slip between shipping containers, moving toward what looked like a service tunnel. As he crawled through the narrow passage, gunshots erupted behind him. The tunnel led to an adjacent building's basement. Marcus emerged into a parking garage where a figure waited in the shadows, a woman with silver hair and a federal marshal's badge. "Judge Valdez," Marcus whispered in disbelief. "Target Beta," she replied grimly. "And you must be the guardian angel who's been trying to save my life." The abandoned warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The surveillance equipment hummed softly beside him, its screens casting an eerie blue glow across his weathered face. For 3 days now, he'd been tracking the movements of what appeared to be a highly coordinated network of operatives, and the pattern that emerged made his blood run cold. Senator Patricia Hawthorne wasn't just another corrupt politician taking bribes. She was the linchpin in an operation that stretched from the docks of Baltimore to the marble corridors of Capitol Hill. The encrypted communications he'd intercepted painted a picture of systematic human trafficking, with children being moved like cargo through a network of safe houses and private jets. Marcus rubbed his eyes, trying to process the enormity of what he'd stumbled into. The homeless camps, the missing kids that everyone assumed were runaways. It was all connected. The very people sworn to protect them were orchestrating their disappearance. A soft beep from the equipment made him freeze. New activity on the network. He leaned forward, studying the scrolling text and GPS coordinates. A convoy was moving tonight, heading to a location just outside the city. The metadata suggested this wasn't routine surveillance. This was active coordination between the traffickers and their government contacts. His hands shook as he cross-referenced the location. An old military installation, supposedly decommissioned, but the satellite imagery showed recent activity, vehicles coming and going, lights in buildings that should have been empty for decades. Marcus knew he should call Detective Rodriguez. She'd listened to him before, even if she'd been skeptical. But something in the communications suggested they had people inside the police department too. "Trust no one," one message had warned. "The snake has many heads." The weight of isolation pressed down on him. Who could you turn to when the corruption reached everywhere, when the very institutions designed to seek justice were part of the machine grinding up the innocent? A new message appeared on screen, and Marcus felt his heart stop. The sender was identified as Blackbird-7, and the recipient was someone coded as Eagle's Nest. But it was the content that made his hands tremble. "Package delivery tonight. Asset acquired from Baltimore camps. High-value merchandise. Client specifications, male, age 12 to 14, no family ties. Transport leaves at 0300 hours. cleanup crew standing by to sanitize acquisition point. Marcus stared at the screen until the words blurred. Package, merchandise. They weren't even pretending these were human beings. The clinical language made it somehow worse, this reduction of children to inventory. He thought about Tommy Martinez, the 12-year-old who'd vanished from the camps 3 weeks ago. Everyone assumed he'd run away, maybe tried to make it to relatives in another state. But Marcus remembered the boy's face, the way he'd talked about finally feeling safe for the first time in months. The GPS coordinates were updating in real time. Marcus could track the convoy, maybe even follow them to the facility. But then what? One homeless man against a network that reached into the highest levels of government? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The equipment wasn't just passive surveillance. It had transmission capabilities. He could send a message through their own network, maybe cause some confusion, but that would reveal his position, mark him as a threat they'd have to eliminate. Another message appeared, this one from Eagle's Nest to multiple recipients. Whistleblower situation contained. Media assets activated to discredit source. Congressional hearing postponed indefinitely. Operation continues as planned. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the warehouse temperature. Someone else had tried to expose this, and they'd been neutralized. The machine was efficient, well-oiled, capable of crushing anyone who threatened it. But as he stared at the screen, watching the convoy move closer to its destination, Marcus realized he couldn't walk away. Tommy Martinez had a face, a name, a laugh that echoed in his memory. How many others were out there, trapped in this nightmare while the world looked the other way? He began typing, his fingers finding a certainty he hadn't felt in years. If they were going to kill him anyway, he'd make sure the truth survived. Every file, every communication, every piece of evidence, he'd find a way to get it to people who couldn't be bought or threatened. The convoy was 20 minutes out from the facility. Marcus packed the equipment into his battered backpack, checking the portable battery levels. He had maybe 6 hours of power left, enough to document whatever was about to happen. As he slipped out of the warehouse into the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus thought about the irony of his situation. He'd spent years invisible to society, dismissed as human debris. Now that same invisibility might be the only thing that could save the children everyone else had forgotten. The hunt was about to become very dangerous, but for the first time in years, Marcus had a reason to stay alive. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched endlessly into darkness, its walls weeping with decades of accumulated moisture. Marcus pressed himself against the cold concrete, clutching the surveillance equipment while Sarah crouched beside him, her breathing shallow and controlled. The footsteps above had stopped, but that only made the silence more ominous. "They're spreading out," Sarah whispered, her lips barely moving. "Standard search pattern. We have maybe 10 minutes before they find this entrance." Marcus adjusted the earpiece, scanning through the encrypted channels. Static filled most frequencies, but then a voice cut through the interference. Clear, authoritative, and chillingly familiar. Sector 7 clear. Moving to the old maintenance tunnels. Copy that. Remember, we need Klein alive, but the vagrant is expendable. Marcus's blood ran cold. They weren't just hunting Sarah anymore. His accidental involvement had made him a target, a loose thread that needed cutting. The weight of the equipment in his hands suddenly felt different, not like salvation, but like a death sentence he'd purchased for $500. Sarah noticed his expression and squeezed his shoulder. "Stay focused. That equipment is our only advantage." "Advantage?" Marcus hissed. "They want to kill me because of this stuff. I should have stayed in that alley. I should have—" "You should have what? Died slowly from exposure instead of quickly from a bullet?" Sarah's eyes blazed in the dim light filtering from above. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not. The question is whether you're going to help me expose them or curl up and wait for them to find you." A new transmission crackled through the earpiece, and Marcus quickly adjusted the frequency. This voice was different, older, more refined, speaking from what sounded like an office rather than a field position. "Status report on Operation Clearwater." "Klein still in the wind, sir. But we have confirmation she accessed the Meridian files. She knows about the congressional payments. Marcus saw Sarah's face go white. She grabbed the earpiece, pressing it closer to her ear. Understood. Accelerate the timeline. Senator Williams needs to announce his withdrawal from the Judiciary Committee by tomorrow morning. Make it look like a health issue. And if he refuses, then make it a real health issue. The transmission ended, leaving them in suffocating silence. Sarah slumped against the tunnel wall, her professional composure finally cracking. "Williams is clean," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. One of the few senators who wouldn't take their money. They're removing him from the committee so they can push through their judicial appointments without opposition. "What's Meridian?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "A shadow corporation. Foreign money, domestic influence. They've been buying judges, congressmen, anyone with power they can use." Sarah looked at the surveillance equipment with new urgency. "This gear you bought, it was being used to monitor their communications. Someone in the Bureau must have been investigating them. Someone who's probably dead now," Marcus said grimly. Heavy footsteps echoed from a connecting tunnel, growing closer. Sarah motioned for silence, pulling a small pistol from her jacket. Marcus had never seen a gun used outside of movies, and the reality of it, the weight, the purpose, the finality, made his hands shake. The footsteps paused directly overhead. Dust filtered down through a grate, dancing in the weak light. Marcus held his breath, counting heartbeats while his mind raced. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been finding enough returnable bottles to buy dinner. Now he was crouched in a tunnel, listening to killers plan the murder of a United States senator. The footsteps moved on, but Sarah remained tense, weapon ready. Only when the sounds faded completely did she lower the gun. "We need to get this information to someone we can trust," she said. "But everyone I knew at the Bureau is either dead or compromised. What about the media? You think any major network will run this without confirmation? And how long do you think we'd survive trying to convince them?" Marcus stared at the surveillance equipment, its LED displays casting an eerie green glow on the tunnel walls. In his homeless years, he'd become invisible to most people, just another piece of urban debris to be ignored. But invisibility could be a weapon too. "I have an idea," he said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." Before Sarah could respond, a new sound echoed through the tunnel, not footsteps this time, but the distant rumble of machinery starting up. Emergency lighting flickered on in sections of the passage, revealing their hiding spot in harsh fluorescent detail. "They're sealing the tunnels," Sarah said, recognizing the sound, "forcing us toward a controlled exit." Marcus shouldered the equipment bag and started deeper into the darkness. "Then we don't take an exit, we make our own." The hunt was closing in, but Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. They wanted him dead for stumbling into their conspiracy. Fine, but he'd make them pay dearly for that privilege. Marcus pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the abandoned warehouse, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The FBI surveillance equipment crackled softly in his makeshift backpack, its green display casting an eerie glow through the torn fabric. 3 days had passed since he'd witnessed the senator's midnight meeting, and the weight of that knowledge felt heavier than the gear he carried. The streets had become a maze of paranoia. Every footstep behind him could be a federal agent, every passing car a potential threat. He'd abandoned his usual haunts under the overpass and the soup kitchen on 5th Street. Those places felt like death traps now, too predictable for someone who knew his patterns. Agent Sarah Chen's business card remained crumpled in his jacket pocket, her direct number memorized but unused. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when he'd overheard conversations suggesting the corruption reached deep into the Bureau itself. The surveillance equipment had revealed a network of communications between dirty agents and the very criminals they were supposed to be hunting. A new signal appeared on the device's screen, stronger than the others. Marcus adjusted the small directional antenna he'd fashioned from a bent coat hanger, following the bearing toward the industrial district. The target designation read Blackbird 7, a code name that had appeared frequently in the intercepted transmissions over the past week. Moving through the shadows between shipping containers, Marcus felt like a ghost haunting his own city. The surveillance gear had transformed him from invisible homeless man to the most hunted person in the state. He'd learned to move differently now, avoiding the security cameras whose locations the FBI equipment helpfully displayed on its tactical map. The signal led him to a converted shipping facility where luxury cars sat parked in precise rows. Through a gap in the fence, Marcus watched as men in expensive suits transferred briefcases between vehicles. The surveillance equipment identified several faces through its facial recognition system, painting red threat indicators over known associates of the Kozlov crime family. But it was the fourth man that made Marcus's blood freeze. Deputy Director Harrison Walsh emerged from a black sedan, his silver hair catching the harsh overhead lights. Marcus had seen Walsh on television countless times, usually standing behind podiums announcing major arrests and speaking about the Bureau's commitment to justice. The surveillance equipment buzzed with activity as it automatically recorded the meeting. Marcus watched Walsh accept a thick envelope from Viktor Kozlov himself, the exchange captured in perfect digital clarity. The device's advanced sensors even picked up fragments of their conversation through its parabolic microphone array. "The senator's becoming a liability," Walsh's voice crackled through the earpiece. "He's asking too many questions about the Detroit operation." Kozlov's response was barely audible, but the surveillance equipment's audio enhancement made every word clear. "Perhaps it's time for Senator Morrison to have an accident, something that looks natural." Marcus's hands trembled as he adjusted the recording settings. He was witnessing the planning of an assassination, and the target was a United States senator who'd been asking the wrong questions about law enforcement corruption. The same senator whose midnight meeting had started this nightmare. A security guard's flashlight beam swept dangerously close to Marcus's hiding spot. He powered down the surveillance equipment's display and pressed himself deeper into the shadows between two containers. The guard paused, radio crackling with chatter about perimeter checks and unauthorized personnel. For 10 agonizing minutes, Marcus remained motionless while the guard completed his patrol route. When the footsteps finally faded, he risked powering the equipment back on. The meeting had ended, the luxury cars disappearing into the night like expensive ghosts. The weight of what he'd recorded settled on Marcus's shoulders like a crushing burden. He possessed evidence that could topple governments and send some of the most powerful people in the country to prison for life. But he also knew that same evidence made him the most valuable target in a very deadly game. Making his way back through the industrial maze, Marcus considered his impossible situation. The surveillance equipment had given him godlike awareness of the criminal conspiracy around him, but it had also painted a target on his back that grew larger with each passing hour. Every recording, every intercepted transmission, every piece of evidence he gathered made him more valuable dead than alive. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in nearly 18 hours. The abandoned restaurant where he'd hidden emergency supplies felt too risky now, too close to the areas where his electronic signature might be detected. Even the surveillance equipment that protected him could betray his location if the wrong people knew how to track it. Agent Chen's card crinkled as he touched his pocket again. The decision to trust her might mean the difference between exposing the conspiracy and dying anonymously in some forgotten alley. But making that choice meant gambling with the only evidence that could save Senator Morrison's life and bring down the network of corruption that had infected the highest levels of American law enforcement. Marcus pulled his hood higher and disappeared into the maze of sleeping streets, carrying secrets that could reshape the nation. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched endlessly into darkness ahead of Marcus, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on the graffitied walls. Behind him, he could hear the distant echo of boots on concrete, Agent Shaw's team methodically searching every entrance, every hiding spot. The surveillance equipment weighed heavy in his backpack, its screens dimmed to preserve battery life. But he knew the data it contained was worth more than his life to the wrong people. Sarah gripped his arm as they moved deeper into the tunnel system. "There," she whispered, pointing to a maintenance ladder barely visible in the gloom. "That leads to the old pneumatic mail system. It connects to the federal building." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You want us to go toward the federal building? That's suicide. It's the last place they'll expect us to surface. Plus I have contacts there, people who aren't part of Kellerman's network." The sound of footsteps grew closer. Marcus made the decision, grabbing the rusted ladder rungs and hauling himself up. Sarah followed, and they found themselves in a narrow tube that had once carried mail canisters throughout the city's government district. The space was cramped, forcing them to crawl single file through decades of dust and debris. As they moved through the claustrophobic passage, Marcus's mind raced through everything he'd discovered. Senator Kellerman's conspiracy reached deep into the FBI, the DEA, even local police departments. The Kozlov operation was just one tentacle of a massive criminal enterprise that had been operating under the protection of some of the most powerful people in the country. "Stop!" Sarah hissed suddenly. Through a grate ahead, voices filtered down from the street level. "Sir, we've lost them in the tunnels," came Agent Shaw's voice, crackling through radio static. "But we've got every exit covered." "Find them, Shaw." Marcus recognized Kellerman's voice, cold and commanding. "The homeless man has seen too much. As for Agent Carter, she's committed treason. Both problems need to be eliminated before morning." Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him. They waited in silence until the voices faded, then continued crawling toward what Sarah claimed was their destination. The pneumatic tube emerged into a forgotten basement storage room filled with obsolete government equipment. Sarah led him up a service staircase, using her security keycard at several checkpoints. Marcus marveled at how she navigated the building's security systems. Clearly, she'd prepared for this possibility long before tonight. They reached the 15th floor, and Sarah guided him to an unmarked office. She knocked in a specific pattern, and the door opened to reveal a stern-faced woman in her 50s. Agent Carter. The woman's expression was unreadable. "You're supposed to be dead." "Not yet, Director Walsh. But someone's trying very hard to change that." Sarah pushed past her into the office. "I need you to see what we've uncovered." Marcus hesitated at the threshold. Director Walsh studied him with sharp eyes. "And you're the homeless man who's been causing so much trouble. Interesting." Inside the office, Marcus carefully removed the surveillance equipment from his backpack. The screens flickered to life, displaying the wealth of intercepted communications, financial transactions, and operational details that had nearly cost them their lives. Director Walsh leaned over the monitors, her expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough that we can't trust normal channels," Sarah replied. "Kellerman has people everywhere. We need to move tonight, before he realizes we're here." "The Attorney General," Walsh said suddenly. "She's clean. I'd stake my career on it. But getting to her means going through Kellerman's people." Marcus spoke up for the first time. "What about the media? If this gets out publicly, they'll claim it's fabricated, that you're just a crazy homeless man with delusions," Walsh interrupted. "We need official channels, but ones Kellerman can't control." She moved to her desk and began making calls, speaking in code phrases that Marcus couldn't follow. Meanwhile, Sarah worked with the surveillance equipment, copying files to encrypted drives. "We've got a window," Walsh announced after her third call. "The Attorney General is being briefed on a different matter in 20 minutes. If we can get to her office without triggering Kellerman's network—" "That's a big if," Sarah said. "He'll have people watching her too." Marcus looked between the two women, federal agents with years of experience, and realized they were as trapped as he was. The conspiracy they'd uncovered was so vast, so deeply embedded in the system, that even with evidence, finding trustworthy allies seemed impossible. An alarm began sounding somewhere in the building. Director Walsh's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it, and her face went pale. Buildings in lockdown. Kellerman just declared you both domestic terrorists. Security teams are sweeping every floor. Through the office windows, Marcus could see black SUVs surrounding the federal building. They were trapped again, and this time there might be no escape route. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched into darkness ahead of Marcus, the weight of stolen evidence heavy in his backpack. Water dripped steadily from rusted pipes overhead, each drop echoing like a countdown timer. He'd been moving through the underground maze for 3 hours, following Chen's hastily scrawled map, but every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Sarah, package delivered to insurance policy. Storm coming your way. Marcus quickened his pace. Sarah had successfully uploaded copies of the surveillance footage to multiple news outlets and whistleblower sites. But Castellano's people would be mobilizing fast. The conspiracy reached too deep, had too many resources to let this exposure happen without a fight. The tunnel branched ahead, and Marcus consulted the map again. Chen had marked 3 possible exit points, each leading to different parts of the city. The closest emerged near Union Station, but it would also be the most obvious choice. Instead, Marcus headed toward the longer route that would bring him up near the federal courthouse. Hiding in plain sight might be his best option. Behind him, distant footsteps echoed off concrete walls. Marcus froze, pressing himself against the damp tunnel wall. The sounds were rhythmic, purposeful. Multiple sets of boots moving with military precision. He switched off his flashlight and relied on the faint green glow from the surveillance equipment's display. The screen showed thermal signatures approaching from behind. 6 figures spread in tactical formation. They were maybe 200 yards back, but gaining ground. Marcus ran. The tunnel floor was treacherous, littered with debris and pooled water that reflected the emergency lighting's sickly yellow glow. His lungs burned as he pushed forward, the heavy equipment bouncing against his spine with each stride. The footsteps behind him grew louder, accompanied now by radio chatter that bounced off the walls in distorted fragments. Target acquired, Section 7, cut off eastern route. They knew the tunnels better than he did. Of course they did. This was their city, their underground network. Marcus realized with growing dread that Chen's escape route might have been compromised from the start. A new sound reached him, the distant rumble of a subway train. The abandoned tunnel must run parallel to an active line. Marcus consulted the map again, squinting in the dim light. There, a maintenance access marked in Chen's careful handwriting, if he could reach it before his pursuers caught up. The access door was 50 yards ahead when the first gunshot cracked through the tunnel. The bullet sparked off the concrete wall inches from Marcus's head, showering him with dust and fragments. He dove forward, rolling behind a pile of construction debris as more shots followed. "This is federal property," a voice called out, amplified by a megaphone. "You're trespassing on a crime scene. Surrender the stolen equipment and you won't be harmed." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. They were offering him safety while shooting at him in an abandoned tunnel, but something in the voice gave him pause. It was too clean, too official. These weren't Castellano's mercenaries. They were actual federal agents, which meant the conspiracy had spread even further than he'd imagined. The surveillance equipment crackled with incoming transmissions. Marcus adjusted the frequency, catching fragments of the tactical team's communications. "Subject has classified materials. Extreme prejudice authorized. National security priority." National security. They were painting him as a terrorist, a traitor, someone who threatened the very foundation of the country. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Who would question the need to stop such a threat? Marcus spotted the maintenance access door 20 feet to his left. Between him and safety lay an open stretch of tunnel with no cover. He'd have to sprint and hope their aim was poor in the dim lighting. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Sarah. "If this goes bad, remember what I told you about my sister in Portland. Make sure she knows." The reply came instantly. "Nothing's going bad. You're going to make it." Marcus took a deep breath, clutched the equipment tighter, and broke from cover. Gunshots erupted behind him, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning. A bullet tugged at his jacket sleeve. Another shattered the concrete at his feet. The access door was locked, but adrenaline gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. The old metal bent under his desperate assault until the lock mechanism gave way. He tumbled through into a narrow maintenance corridor just as the tactical team rounded the debris pile. This new passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders, forcing him to crawl forward while dragging the equipment behind him. The agent's shouts grew muffled as he put distance between himself and the tunnel, but he could hear them trying to follow, their larger frames struggling with the tight space. Ahead, natural light filtered down through a grating. Street level. Freedom was 20 feet away, but Marcus could already hear vehicles converging above, the net tightening around him with each passing second. The abandoned subway tunnel stretched endlessly in both directions, its walls weeping with decades of moisture and neglect. Marcus pressed his back against the cold concrete, the surveillance equipment heavy in his duffel bag, while distant footsteps echoed through the darkness above. They'd found his last safe house 3 hours ago, forcing him deeper underground into the city's forgotten arteries. His phone buzzed with another encrypted message from Agent Chen. Package delivered. Rendezvous compromised. New extraction point, Grand Central, Track 17, maintenance level, 1 hour. 1 hour. Marcus checked his watch, 2:47 a.m. The timing would be tight, but Grand Central's labyrinthine depths offered better cover than these tunnels. He shouldered the bag and began moving east, following the faint emergency lighting that flickered sporadically along the abandoned line. The intercepted communications from Blackwood's network had painted a terrifying picture. Tomorrow's pharmaceutical summit wasn't just about approving new medications. It was the final step in a systematic poisoning scheme that would affect millions. The contaminated drug shipments were already in distribution centers across 12 states, waiting for tomorrow's approval to release them into the market. Marcus emerged from a maintenance grate 6 blocks from Grand Central, the pre-dawn air sharp against his face. The streets were nearly empty except for delivery trucks and early shift workers heading to their posts. He pulled his hood up and walked quickly, staying close to building shadows. A black SUV turned the corner ahead, moving slowly, scanning. Marcus ducked into a 24-hour diner, sliding into a back booth where he could watch the street. The vehicle passed without stopping, but his pulse remained elevated. They weren't just tracking him anymore, they were hunting. The diner's television droned quietly in the background, showing early morning news. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee when Senator Richardson's face filled the screen. The man he'd seen coordinating with Blackwood was announcing his intention to personally oversee the pharmaceutical approval process, citing public safety concerns. "Will ensure that these vital medications reach the American people without unnecessary delays," Richardson was saying, his practiced smile never wavering. "The health and welfare of our citizens must come first." The lies flowed so smoothly that Marcus felt sick. Richardson wasn't protecting anyone. He was positioning himself to personally expedite the poisoned drugs through the approval process. The timing of his announcement, just hours before the summit, revealed the conspiracy's confidence in its own success. Marcus paid for his coffee and left through the diner's rear exit. 3 blocks to Grand Central, then down to the maintenance level. He could do this. He had to do this. The terminal's main concourse was busier than expected for the early hour, filled with commuters catching the first trains to the suburbs. Marcus moved through the crowd, using their movement as cover while scanning for surveillance. 2 men in suits stood near the information booth, their positions too strategic to be coincidental. He spotted the maintenance entrance near Track 15, its heavy door marked with warning signs about authorized personnel only. A janitor's cart sat nearby, abandoned during a shift change. Marcus grabbed a maintenance uniform from the cart and pulled it over his clothes, then approached the door with practiced confidence. The lock yielded to his improvised tools, skills learned during desperate months on the streets. The maintenance level below was a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and service corridors that stretched beneath the entire terminal. Marcus found track 17 feet section and settled in to wait. His phone buzzed. Chen's message was brief, delayed. Blackwood's people raided FBI field office. Trust no one else. Hold position. The words sent ice through Marcus's veins. If Blackwood had compromised the FBI office, how many other agents were involved? How deep did this conspiracy reach? He thought about the pharmaceutical companies, the government approvals, the coordinated timing. This wasn't just about money. This was about control on a massive scale. Footsteps echoed in the maintenance corridor. Marcus killed his phone's screen and pressed himself against a support beam, barely breathing. Two figures moved past his hiding spot, their voices low but audible. Chen's gone dark. Probably warned the homeless guy. The voice was familiar. Agent Morrison from the surveillance team. Doesn't matter. We sweep the terminal level by level. Richardson wants this finished before the summit starts. The second voice was crisp, authoritative. No witnesses, no evidence. They continued down the corridor, their flashlight beams dancing across the walls. Marcus waited until their footsteps faded, then carefully moved deeper into the maintenance tunnels. Chen was compromised or worse. The FBI office was blown. He was completely alone with evidence that could save millions of lives or doom them. His fingers traced the surveillance equipment in his bag. Somewhere in its memory, banks lay the proof of everything. Recorded conversations, financial transfers, the entire network mapped out in digital detail. But without Chen, he had no way to get it to legitimate authorities. The footsteps were returning, accompanied by others. They were conducting a systematic search, and his hiding spots were running out. The abandoned warehouse felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, the modified surveillance equipment humming softly in his backpack. 3 days of careful planning had led to this moment. The meeting between Senator Harrison and Victor Kozlov that would either expose the conspiracy or get him killed. Sarah adjusted her position beside him, her camera ready. They'd spent hours going over the plan, but Marcus could feel her tension radiating in waves. Detective Rodriguez was positioned at the far end of the warehouse, his service weapon drawn, while Agent Chen covered the rear exit. The small team of allies they'd assembled felt impossibly inadequate against the forces arrayed against them. Movement. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the cheap walkie-talkie they were using instead of phones. Black SUV approaching from the north. Marcus activated the surveillance equipment, watching as the thermal imaging came alive on his screen. 2 figures emerged from the vehicle, Harrison's distinctive profile unmistakable even in the grainy display. The second figure had to be Kozlov, though Marcus had only seen him in surveillance photos. Recording everything, Sarah whispered, her lens trained on the warehouse entrance. The heavy metal door groaned open, and Harrison stepped inside, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place in the industrial decay. Kozlov followed, flanked by 2 bodyguards who immediately began scanning the perimeter. Marcus held his breath, praying their hiding spots would hold. "You're late," Harrison's voice echoed through the empty space, picked up clearly by the directional microphones. "Your homeless problem required attention," Kozlov replied, his accent thick but his English precise. "The man with our equipment has been resourceful." Marcus felt Sarah's hand grip his arm. This was it. Confirmation that they'd been hunting him specifically for the surveillance gear. Harrison paced nervously. Miller was supposed to handle this quietly. Instead, we have dead FBI agents and a media shitstorm brewing. The president is asking questions. Miller served his purpose. His elimination removes a liability. Kozlov's casual tone made Marcus's blood run cold. As will the homeless man's once we locate him. "The committee is getting nervous," Harrison continued. 40 years of careful planning, and it could all unravel because of one vagrant with electronics he doesn't understand. Kozlov laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Your committee has grown soft. In my country, we would have found him within hours. This isn't Russia, Harrison snapped. We can't just disappear American citizens without consequences. Cannot or will not. Kozlov's voice carried a mocking edge. Your conscience is a luxury we cannot afford. The shipment arrives in 6 days. If the surveillance network is compromised, we lose everything. Marcus's equipment picked up additional movement outside. More vehicles were arriving. This wasn't just a meeting between two conspirators. His blood chilled as he realized the scope of what they'd stumbled into. The other committee members should be here soon, Harrison said, checking his watch. Senator Williams, Judge Patterson, Director Hayes from Homeland Security. They need to hear your proposal directly. Sarah's camera clicked softly as she documented each new arrival. Marcus watched the thermal display fill with additional heat signatures. What he'd thought was a simple meeting between two criminals was actually a gathering of some of the most powerful people in Washington. The beauty of our arrangement, Kozlov continued, is that your surveillance network gives us real-time intelligence on federal law enforcement. Every investigation, every operation, we see it coming before it begins. Marcus understood now. The equipment he'd accidentally purchased wasn't just tracking criminals, it was part of a comprehensive espionage operation that had infiltrated the highest levels of American government. The homeless situation is a minor inconvenience, a new voice said as more figures entered the warehouse. Marcus recognized Senator Williams from television. We control the narrative. A few more convenient accidents, and the problem resolves itself. Convenient accidents? Harrison sounded uncertain. We agreed to limit civilian casualties. Your idealism is admirable but impractical, Judge Patterson's voice cut through the darkness. We're reshaping the geopolitical landscape. Individual lives are acceptable losses. Marcus felt sick. These weren't just corrupt officials taking bribes. They were traitors orchestrating something massive, using American surveillance capabilities to benefit foreign interests. The network expansion continues on schedule, Director Hayes added. By year's end, we'll have complete coverage of every major metropolitan area. Real-time feeds directly to Moscow. Rodriguez's voice crackled urgently through the radio, multiple vehicles surrounding the building. We may be blown. Marcus's hands flew over the equipment, desperately trying to capture every word, every face, every detail that could expose this conspiracy. Sarah continued photographing, her camera now equipped with a night vision attachment. Suddenly, one of Kozlov's bodyguards pointed directly toward their position. Motion detected, Sector 7. The warehouse erupted into chaos as armed figures began converging on their hiding spots. Marcus grabbed the surveillance equipment while Sarah snatched her camera. They had everything they needed, if they could survive long enough to use it. Run! Rodriguez's voice shouted through static. Get that evidence out of here. The final confrontation had begun. The abandoned warehouse Marcus had chosen for the meeting felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Steel beams stretched into shadows above, and broken windows let in slivers of orange streetlight that barely penetrated the gloom. He positioned himself behind a concrete pillar with a clear view of both entrances. The modified FBI equipment spread around him like a digital command center. The screens flickered with feeds from cameras he'd strategically placed, tracking every movement within a 3-block radius. Sarah Chen arrived first, her footsteps echoing as she moved carefully through the debris-strewn floor. She wore tactical gear beneath a dark jacket, and Marcus could see the outline of a weapon at her hip. Despite everything they'd been through, his pulse quickened when she appeared in his line of sight. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, but she was the closest thing to an ally he had. You're early, she called softly, knowing he was watching. So are you. Marcus emerged from behind the pillar, keeping his voice low. Johnson? 2 blocks out with his team. They'll move on my signal. She studied his makeshift setup, impressed despite the circumstances. You've turned this place into a fortress. More like a mousetrap. Marcus pulled up the thermal imaging display. Senator Walsh's motorcade just turned onto Industrial Boulevard. 3 vehicles, plus the decoy convoy taking the northern route. The weight of what they were about to attempt settled between them. They had one chance to expose the conspiracy that had cost so many lives, including Detective Rodriguez and countless others who'd gotten too close to the truth. The evidence Marcus had gathered over the past weeks was damning, but only if they could keep him alive long enough to present it. Sarah checked her earpiece. "Marcus, there's something you need to know about tonight, about why Walsh is really coming here." The tone in her voice made him look up from the screens. "What do you mean?" "The meeting with Kozlov isn't just about silencing you. There's a bigger operation going down. Arms shipment, scheduled to arrive at the port in 47 minutes. Walsh has been facilitating weapons transfers to 3 different criminal organizations. Tonight's the grand finale before he disappears." Marcus felt the familiar chill of being several steps behind people who held all the cards. "How long have you known?" "Johnson figured it out yesterday. We couldn't risk telling you over any communication channel." She moved closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, if we can get proof of tonight's shipment in addition to everything else, it's not just Walsh who goes down. This thing reaches into the State Department, possibly Homeland Security." A new thermal signature appeared on his screen. Vehicles approaching from the south. Marcus enhanced the feed and counted 4 SUVs moving in formation. "They're here." Sarah activated her earpiece. "Johnson, we have contact. Begin Phase 1. Through the surveillance equipment, Marcus watched as Walsh's motorcade split up, with the main vehicle heading directly for the warehouse while the others took perimeter positions. The senator was taking no chances, but then again neither was Marcus. He'd spent his last 3 days rigging the building with audio and video capture devices, turning every corner into a potential witness to whatever was about to unfold. "Remember," Sarah said, checking her weapon, "we need him talking. We need him to admit to the murders, the cover-up, everything." A black SUV pulled up to the main entrance, and Marcus watched on screen as Senator Walsh stepped out, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Even at this distance, Marcus could see the predatory confidence in the man's movements. This was someone accustomed to having problems eliminated efficiently and quietly. "Contact from the east," Marcus reported, switching camera feeds. 3 vehicles, Russian plates. "That'll be Kozlov." The Russian crime boss emerged from his vehicle like something from a nightmare, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that did nothing to hide the arsenal underneath. His men spread out with military precision, taking positions that would give them clear fields of fire into the warehouse. "Jesus," Sarah breathed, watching the display. "How many people did they bring?" Marcus did a quick count across all his camera feeds. 12 for Walsh, maybe 15 with Kozlov. Johnson better have more than just a team out there. "He does." Sarah's voice carried a grim satisfaction. "Half the task force is positioned around this area, plus FBI tactical units. But Marcus, once this starts, there's no going back. These people have killed federal agents, judges, witnesses. They won't hesitate to kill us." As if summoned by her words, both groups began moving toward the warehouse entrances. Marcus made final adjustments to the recording equipment, knowing that the next few minutes would either expose one of the largest corruption scandals in recent history or see them all dead. "Sarah," he said quietly, "if this goes wrong—" "It won't." She squeezed his shoulder. "We end this tonight." The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus dove behind a shipping container, the stolen FBI equipment clutched against his chest. Senator Hawthorne's voice cut through the gunfire, sharp and commanding. "Kill them both. No witnesses." Agent Sarah Chen rolled behind cover beside Marcus, blood seeping through her jacket from a graze across her shoulder. "The recording," she gasped. "Tell me you got everything." Marcus nodded, his fingers trembling as he checked the device. The red light still blinked steadily. Every word of Hawthorne's confession had been captured. The senator's admission to orchestrating the murders, his coordination with Russian assets, his plans to eliminate Marcus and Chen. It was all there. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Chen's backup finally arrived, their shouts echoing through the warehouse as they flooded through multiple entrances. But Hawthorne wasn't finished. As his mercenaries engaged the FBI team in a fierce firefight, the senator himself appeared at the end of their row, pistol drawn. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his silver hair wild, his eyes holding the desperate gleam of a cornered predator. 20 years building my network, he snarled, advancing toward them. 20 years positioning assets, accumulating power. I won't let some homeless junkie destroy everything. Marcus felt the familiar rage building, the same fury that had once driven him to the bottle, that had cost him his family, his home, everything. But now it was different. Now it was focused. I'm not the same man who crawled into that alley, Marcus said, rising slowly. You picked the wrong person to hunt. Hawthorne's laugh was bitter. You're nothing. A drunk, a failure, a... Chen's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The senator's pistol clattered across the concrete as he stumbled, clutching his wound. Within seconds, FBI agents swarmed him, weapons trained, voices shouting commands. Senator James Hawthorne, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and about a dozen other federal charges, Chen announced, struggling to her feet. As the dust settled and the last of the mercenaries surrendered, Marcus found himself sitting on a crate, the surveillance equipment finally silent in his lap. The warehouse buzzed with activity, crime scene techs photographing evidence, medics treating wounded agents, federal prosecutors already on phones coordinating with Washington. Chen approached him, her arm now in a makeshift sling. You know this is going to be the biggest political scandal in decades. Hawthorne was chair of the Intelligence Committee. His network reached into Congress, the Pentagon, even the White House staff. Marcus nodded absently, watching as they led the senator away in handcuffs. What happens now? Months of testimony, congressional hearings, the media circus will be insane. Chen sat beside him, wincing slightly. You're going to be the most important witness in modern American history. I just wanted a warm jacket, Marcus said quietly. Chen smiled. Sometimes the most important changes start with the smallest actions. She paused, studying his face. There's something else. The Bureau wants to offer you a position. Marcus looked up, startled. What? Consultant. Your insights during this investigation, the way you understood surveillance patterns, tracked connections. You have instincts most agents never develop. Plus, you've proven you can handle pressure. I don't have training, credentials. You have something better. You see what others miss because you've been invisible yourself. Chen handed him a business card. Think about it. The country needs people like you. 3 months later, Marcus stood in a federal courthouse, straightening the tie that still felt foreign around his neck. Through the windows, he could see protesters and media crowds, their chants and camera flashes a constant reminder of how far his world had expanded from that frozen alley. His testimony had been devastating. Hawthorne's network had crumbled as more conspirators were arrested, foreign assets expelled, and classified information secured. The senator himself faced life in prison. But for Marcus, the most meaningful moment came afterward, outside the courthouse. A young woman approached him. Homeless, desperate, carrying everything she owned in a backpack. I saw you on the news, she said quietly. Before all this, you were like me. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out Chen's business card, one of many the FBI had given him to distribute. There's always a way forward, he said gently. Sometimes you just need the right equipment. She took the card with shaking hands, and Marcus saw in her eyes the same mixture of fear and hope he'd carried for so long. Walking away, Marcus felt the weight of his new badge in his jacket pocket, the responsibility it represented. He'd gone from surveillance target to federal consultant, from society's invisible to its protector. His phone buzzed. Another case, another chance to use his hard-earned perspective to serve justice. Marcus smiled and answered the call, disappearing once again into the crowd, but this time by choice.